you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, I'm joined by Tammy Robbins, the VP of Business Development at ProEquities. Now, ProEquities is a medium-sized independent broker-dealer, and what that means is they have hundreds of independent financial advisors. These are independent business owners who are relying on them for support and a lot of other stuff. And that support became a little more urgent during a time of pandemic, as I'm sure you may be experiencing in your business. Now, Tammy and her team also have some challenges because her team's used to working in the office. And suddenly, for the last 5 months or so, they're all working from home as well. So this is a double challenge, right? How do you adapt and lead your team during a time of suddenly everybody's working from home? But then also, how do you lead independent business owners who rely on you and have some level of expectation for what they're going to get from your firm? But they're also a little uncomfortable with what to do next in their business, right? Many financial advisors have never worked from home. I mean, occasionally they do it, but they never thought to themselves that, yeah, I'm not going into the office for months on end. And my clients are certainly never going to come see me in my office. And it's probably not a good idea if I go to my client's house to meet with them in person. I've got to go digital. Now, the interesting thing about that, and we're going to cover a wide range of subject matter on this concept. The interesting thing is there is that silver lining that we just touched upon slightly there. That is, this industry has been a little slower than others to adopt some of the digital communication and engagement technologies that most of the rest of the business world is getting really comfortable with. Things like video conferencing, video chat, things like regular chat, and even sometimes email and text and exchanging documents electronically. Some of that stuff has been, let's call it, in the area of not 100% comfortable for many financial advisors. And we've talked about, the financial advisors as a demographic skews a little bit older. And if you built your business by meeting with people in person, by calling on the regular old tried and true telephone, by hosting seminars and lunch and learns to build your business, well, suddenly being forced into a world where you work from home and don't interact with the humans live and in person, it's a challenge, right? And a lot of empathy there. But Tammy and her team at ProEquities have done a fantastic job. And I am really grateful to Tammy because she's very gracious enough to come on the show and kind of, share some of the stuff that they've learned with the wider community. So hopefully you learned something out of this episode and take it and apply it to your team. I'm really appreciative of Tammy for the share today. As always, make sure you do like and subscribe to the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google, wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or suggestion for the show, feel free to reach out at podcast@truelytics.com or swing by Truelytics and just use the contact form, or you can always hit me up. I'm at Mike Langford pretty much everywhere on the socials. I will love to hear from you. Okay, without further ado, let's get to it with Tammy Robbins from ProEquities. Well, Tammy, I am super excited to have you on the show. I've been really looking forward to this podcast, and it's taken us about a month or so to put it together. You have a very busy schedule, albeit working from home now. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah. And what's really cool about this, and I love that I always do these pre-calls with the guests, right? Like, let's have a little call, get our conversational chemistry going, and kind of think about some of the topics that we want to talk about. And usually I have, like, in my head, I'm like, I know exactly what I want to ask you, all these questions of the guests. But you and I started having a just nice little conversation back and forth. And all the topics for today's conversation came out of that pre-call. So I'm pumped for this one.
Absolutely. Me too.
Yeah. So our topic, I guess, for today is leading through the new working remote reality, because you were talking about it, like you or your team prior to this, like most firms in our industry, most of the people were in the office environment. And then suddenly, again, like most of us in the industry, you're all working remotely. So how has that transition gone for you?
The transition has gone remarkably well. I think that we all had a little bit of hesitation at first, but we have wonderful technology. Most everything is now internet-based, and so you really can accomplish most everything in a remote environment. And we were able to transition to that environment very quickly. I think a lot of folks were really surprised that we were remote then. I think it was, a week to 10 days, really going, okay, this is real. We've got to figure out how we're going to deal with it. And we were able to get people deployed in home and in their, safe environment, basically, to be able to do their jobs and have the tools at their fingertips for them too. So it was really, really a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think probably I would imagine this resonates with you as you at first, for those of us who work from home, like I've been working from home for years, right? And so I'm comfortable with it. I kind of feel like I trained for this. I've been ready to rock and roll for this for a long time. But for those people, and I imagine this might have happened on your team, they're suddenly home for the first time. And they're thinking, well, this is short term. I'm going to be back within a week or two, probably in their mindset. Because I think that was what the guidance was, right? Go home, everybody stay home for a couple of weeks until this passes, flatten the curve, and you'll be back in the office. And now it's been months. How have things changed now that we are several months into this?
Yeah, so I think we've easily identified who works well at home and who may have some challenges, right? There are some people who are not meant to be work from home and be kind of soloed off, right? They need people, they need the energy, and that's good. We need people like that, and we need people who are fine, working solo all the time. I mean, that's great too. What I like, about it is we're learning strengths and weaknesses, everyone, and we're learning new ways to connect with each other. So it's making sure, as we had talked about previously as a leader, making sure you're getting that interaction with your team. So having those Zoom calls or team calls, still see each other face to face, right? So that we're saying, hey, I'm here. What do you need? I'm just not a text message or a phone call. You can physically see me too, if you want to have that interaction. And just, learning the groove, hey, that really helped me that we had a 15-minute huddle every single morning to get through this. I continue to hear different feedback like that. And hey, are there different ways that we can engage with our clients, right? Our advisors more in a virtual world where, again, we can still see one another. And I think those things that we're learning have been really super interesting because we're all learning about ourselves, we're learning about each other, and we're adapting phenomenally well. I would say that we've done really good at moving this thing forward and keeping, quite honestly, our productivity level up, and in some cases even greater, because you do tend to see there's that I need to leave work at a certain time, right? You're home. So for me, it's like going downstairs, right?
Yeah.
At what point do I call it a day and walk downstairs? And then that's if I don't take my computer down and put it in the kitchen and take it down there with me.
It's interesting. It made me think of something that took me a while to adjust to when I started working from home and stopped being in an office, was time shifting, right? Deciding that I'm not just on a 9 to 5, right? That if I feel like I'm going to work on something in the morning, and I don't feel at all guilty sometimes if I take a break in the middle of the day for a couple of hours, go do things that are me-centric, like work out or whatever that thing is, go to lunch. But then I might be working at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night when other people under a normal office scenario might be working. Have you seen that amongst the team, or is that something, and I guess not everybody can do that. There are certain things that are time sensitive and have to be with market hours, but have you seen that happening within the team at all?
In some cases, right? So there is a little bit more of that flexibility that people have, but there's time sensitive functions of the organization where they have to be ready and at their desk or in front of their computer, so to speak, and ready to take calls during specific hours. So not all functions have that flexibility, but we have seen that with others. And then likewise, I mean, I'll raise my hand. I mean, I'm very guilty that, it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm back on my computer doing emails, right? And so somebody's email responding to me right away and going, oh, hey, you're online. Good. Hey, can we get this and this solved? And I'm like, what are you doing working at 10 o'clock? Like, it's just,
that's right.
There is that dynamic, right? And so we do see a little bit of that. Now, and flipping that, I do worry, right, about burnout, because I think that, I personally have to watch it for myself, because, it's very easy for me to, everybody's kind of settled and they don't need mom anymore. I can switch back into, Tammy and get back into my work mode and start doing stuff. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I got to take a break. I need a mental break. And so I continue to try to coach my team to say, hey, when you shut down, it's good. Go ahead and shut down, like, for the day. Go be with your family, take the mental break so that you're fresh the next day. There's pluses and minuses, right, to all of those things.
I think that's incredibly good advice and a good leadership lesson, right? Of sometimes people need to be told that it's okay to stop working, because they feel like, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, when you're in the office, there's FaceTime, right? Like, you're there, I see you working, I walk by your office, your cube, whatever your, office setup is like there. And I know you're there, at least you're present. But when you're remote, I don't 100% know. I mean, you may have a system where you can see that the person's online or offline, but I think and I know I felt it at times, where you feel like you need to be showing that you're always working or you're producing or something like that. And occasionally you need somebody like yourself to be able to say, hey, log off for a little while.
Right.
Because it is weird. Like, some of this stuff, like, you're in people's homes for the first time. Like, if they've never been in a work from home, or they might not even have the right setup. So they might be working in their bedroom. They might be working from their kitchen table or their couch or whatever. And so for them, there's a feeling of overwhelm. And so I think it's really sound advice to make sure that people get some personal time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, and well, they will know, because I will have introduced this on the podcast when they're hearing this, but ProEquities is an independent broker dealer. And so you have your internal team, which I feel like we were focusing most of our attention on there so far, but you also have this large population of distributed independent financial advisors that you serve, and you refer to them as your clients. They're spread out all over the place. And so you have some really interesting experiences with these advisors over the time, right? And you said that many of them have never worked from home before and or had to interact with their clients remotely. So how are you helping the advisors adapt?
Yeah, so that was a big transition, right? So the majority of our advisors, most of them had face-to-face, and that's just an industry thing, right? So most of the advisors are going to have a large portion of their client meetings face-to-face. And so when we all of a sudden went into this remote environment, many people had never even engaged with technology like Zoom, like Teams or WebEx or whatever they might be using, to even know how to use it. How do I even set my clients up for that? So there was a curve that we saw where we were educating them and basically pushing things out. We did a whole host of different series. So we put a document out that had live links to it so that they could go out and get the different, here's Zoom, right? So put your little link to Zoom, and here's this. And so they could learn and know where those resources were housed, but then also guidance for them, right? So when I think about, what you should and shouldn't do or via virtual meeting, making sure that you're not doing it somewhere you don't want them to see the back of, the wall, right? Like, go make sure that, you're in an environment that you want them to see. So if you want it to still be in a professional setting, do it in your home office, right? Maybe not the kitchen table, as you said. So, giving them advice on microphones. Do they need a camera? I mean, we're talking real basic stuff, right? For a lot of folks. And they really needed that, and they needed it very quickly. And so we pushed out a lot of that. We did, our practice management team were on the phone, making phone calls, answering questions on a one-on-one basis. But then we put out a broader series. And so we do have quite a few of our advisors that had done a lot of work with Zoom and some of those virtual meeting vendors quite frequently with, clients they may have across the country or what have you. And so they were able, because in my personal opinion, I always feel that, you can hear from the home office, but isn't it even better to hear from your peers on what they see and how they're doing it and what's working and what's not working for them? And so I continue to, push them back. So we have this whole series, it's a video series of those hosted by our advisors where we interviewed and start asking questions. So, hey, John, what are you using? And why would you prefer this over this? And do you have a preferred camera? Do you have a preferred, vendor for this? And so it was really a live teaching session, peer to peer, which is, such valuable feedback. And then of course we have home office on there to make sure that, what they're saying they can do, right, from a compliance perspective, and making sure that, hey, yeah, this is good. This is something that you can do. So it's been a huge learning curve for them. And I think that we'll see some of them, Mike, we're just doing a survey, actually, it's just getting ready to go out to all of our advisors. And this is led by our advisory board. So we have an advisory board here at ProEquities, and they said, why don't we do a survey and say, what are you doing now? Like, what are the changes that you're going to keep? Is it going to be like, new cleaning regimen for your office? Are you going to allow your staff to come back full time? Will you think that you'll do more virtual or in person going forward, right? So there's all of these different things that they want to know, what are my peers going to do? Because this eventually will, die down and things will go back to normal, as normal, will be. I think it will be a redefined normal for a lot of folks, and they may adapt long-term processes in their office. I just kind of see that being something that not only, corporations and broker dealers, but, the financial advisors will also implement as they, test and see what their clients want, what their desires are.
And this is that Pro Elite Advisor Series, right? That's what you called it.
Yes.
I think. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about that most is it's a community-based solution, right? So you're inviting the advisors to kind of guide each other, right? And so you're showing the leadership by creating the environment, by creating the platform through which they can communicate. And it sounds like you're moderating and setting things up, and which is a great idea and a great approach. But instead of trying to dictate down, like, hey, here's how you're going to do this. This is what you can have recommendations, but you're facilitating conversations and allowing the advisors to teach each other. I think it's a really smart approach. Well, had you had prior experience doing that, or is this something new that you guys batted around the idea internally and said, why don't we do it this way?
Well, we've always engaged with our advisors, and I think one of the important pieces of how we're structured, we're small enough, we're considered more of a mid-size type of broker dealer where we don't have thousands upon thousands of financial professionals that we deal with, right? We have more of an elite group that we know very well. And this really helps create that sense of community and allows us to be able to tap and have kind of these little chats where we can all get together. And so we've done some of these things very rarely where we've, kind of got us in and moderated. A lot of times we'll do a joint presentation together, but this was a whole new environment. I mean, we've never obviously went through a pandemic before. And I think everybody was just like, I need to know what my peers are doing. So like, it'd just be like, hey, let's get all our buddies on the phone, right? Like, but let's do video because that's just so much more impactful. Because honestly, people wanted to see what's in the background of me. What, do you have a picture hanging? Are you in your office or, where are you? And kind of see the environment that they had created in which they were going to be seeing their clients, virtually as well. And so I do think that, we'll continue to do those going forward, but we've done them, I would say, long answer to your question, Mike, but I would say that, we've done them, but not as frequently as we certainly have now. And now we really know how impactful it has been, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
I love it. By the way, I love the long answer to the question because you learn a lot more, right? And not everything has to be a quick soundbite. This is a long format show. Just let it rip. The thing I love about podcasts, right, is you record it and you put it out there and people can pause. That's
right. That's right.
You can come back to this when you want to. So no, that was really, really good. You really got me thinking about the future of work for financial advisors. Like, what's that future environment? You mentioned that, like, are some of the advisors maybe rethinking what life looks like even after the pandemic is lifted and we're all not afraid of our health risk anymore. We're just kind of going about and interacting with people. You had told me a couple of stories of maybe some advisors might be rethinking paying that lease that they pay on that office space, and because they're getting comfortable working from home. And what's funny about it is, I don't know the demographics of your advisor population, but I know that in general, the average age of a financial advisor now is creeping close to 60, and 40% are over 60 globally in the United States. I always think of my parents, right? For the longest time, if they wanted to talk to me, like, oh, if I want to talk to you, I'll call you on the phone, or I want to see you in person or whatever. And now I'm lucky if I get a text message from my parents, right? Like they're just like totally like, I feel like I'm having interactions with them, and they're in their late 60s. They're young on the young side, but they, it's just like I get texts, I get emojis, and stuff like that from my parents, which
funny.
I just think is hilarious. But like, you're the same people who are like, I had to teach how to use like some of the basics. So they adopted really, really fast. Right. And now I think to myself, like if they were an advisor's clients, as an example, and the advisor started interacting with them digitally, they might be a little like, yeah, I'm not sure I want to come to your office. It's, I'd have to get into my car. I'd have to drive down there.
Right. Yeah.
What are you hearing from the advisors about their thoughts? Because I actually kind of feel like in some ways, if we're looking for a silver lining, we know that the industry is going digital. We just do, right? It's happening, whether we like it or not. This is kind of forcing some advisors who might have kind of dragged their feet a little bit to modernize more quicker. And the name of this podcast is The Modern Financial Advisor. So yeah, we'll talk about their modernizing. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so we're absolutely seeing and having conversations. We've probably had more conversations on, what's going to happen during an audit if I decide to work more on the remote basis? What are my books and records? Where do they have to be? Does somebody have to see a bricks and mortar type of building? And so we've answered a lot more of those questions. And I really feel, in talking with some of our advisors, specifically more your solo practitioners, right, with staff. Either they're by themselves or they have staff, but not necessarily the team of advisors. The solo practitioners with staff are just, they're solo practitioners themselves without staff. They're sitting there going, why am I paying $2,000 a month for this fancy office when 90% of my meetings are probably going to be virtual going forward? And so I do envision that we'll have more and more of them working out of the little casitas in their backyard, right? That they might build so they can commute, across the patio. And something, still have a way to meet clients, because let's not forget that, a lot of times advisors are going to clients. So they're not always coming into the advisor's office. So when I think about those clients that still want that face-to-face, it'll just be done on their terms. So it'll be, hey, let's go meet for lunch, or, hey, let me come to your house, because I can bring my technology and I can show you all of your accounts, and we can do your reviews just the same in my office as we could do on screen or at your house at your kitchen table.
Yeah. It's really interesting about that. I'm reminded of like earlier in my career when I was an advisor, I got the advice of like, try to have the meeting at the client's home or office versus your office. And I was like, why is that? And the senior advisor was like, to guard against the shoebox effect. I'm like, what? He's like, well, if they're at your office, they brought what they thought was important. And then you are going to ask them to see statements from all their other accounts because you want to see the full picture. And you want to avoid them saying, oh, that's at home in a shoebox, right? And then he said, the other positive is if you're in their home and you're sitting at their kitchen table or dining room, wherever they decide to have you sit, you can look around and see pictures on the wall. You can get a sense of like what's important to them. You can see like if they like to sail, they like to ski, or they have a dog, or whatever their thing is. You get a feel for who they are. Now you can kind of just go do a little Facebook stalking and go check them out on Facebook and Instagram and kind of get a feel for who they are before you go meet with the prospect or the client. But I always thought that was some really interesting advice.
Oh, it's great advice.
You made me think of something else, and I want to get your take on this, because just now during this process, I thought about this. You mentioned that, an advisor building a casita off the back, or if they already have a pool house or whatever, converting it, or, a new wing of the house, depending on what their setup is. I wonder, because, at Truelytics, they have that the True Performance tool, right? And then it does the valuations and stuff. And there's all these 50 KPIs, and it just measures a lot of the traditional metrics. I wonder, do you see a scenario in which maybe in the future, an acquiring advisor may look and want to see your setup for remote work as something that would be valuable to them? Like, is that something that you're thinking maybe if I was an advisor, I want to have somebody that has clients sort of comfortable with that?
Yeah, so I definitely think it could play into that, right? So let's think about how an advisor looks to acquire a practice. There's lots of limitations as a buyer and a seller. So if you think about expanding into a virtual world where you're having virtual meetings and the clients are comfortable and they are accustomed to meeting with the advisor in a virtual space, you could be in New York and I could be in California, and all of a sudden it's not important. It doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself to selling the practice within a geographical area that's all within 100 miles of where most of my clients are, right? You've really opened the doors and you've actually said, hey, now I can go out and get prime price for it because everybody is accustomed to virtual meetings, and let's, kind of let the bidding war begin, right? And see what I can get for this practice that I have built virtually. So I absolutely think it could play into the overall valuations of practices going forward.
It's really interesting to think about that, right? I mean, I didn't think about that concept as well. Like, just, geographic location, frankly, isn't as important if you've built a virtual practice or transition your business into that every client accepts the notion of being able to interact virtually, not have to come to a specific like brick and mortar type place. That's really interesting. Along the same lines, restaurants have been hit awfully hard, and many of those restaurants have traditionally had dine-in only service, right? That's right. The way that they service their patrons, and some of them are in big trouble because they weren't set up to be able to do takeout at scale or delivery at scale. And so therefore, obviously, one might suspect, like, going forward, if you're going to have a viable restaurant and you're going to be able to raise money from investors for that restaurant, you're going to have check some boxes about being able to have delivery, being able to have people do takeout. And then I would also say one thing that's likely to have changed there is cash reserves, right? If I was going to invest, like, you had better have some cash reserves to weather a storm that you don't see coming, because it's really put a lot of businesses in a pinch. If you have to put your future hat on or your crystal ball on, what are you thinking, kind of maybe beyond some of the stuff we talked about, but it can be some of the things we've already talked about? Advisors in the future are going to be some requirements that you would expect them to have if they were starting a business now, what they would want to have to grow that business effectively. So,
clarifying question.
Sure.
For you, when you talk about growing it effectively, are you talking about, so if I'm a young advisor coming into the industry, what advice are we going to give them as far as how they build it?
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it, right? So obviously if you've got advisors who already have a big book of business and they've built it over decades, it's maintaining that business. Obviously there's some growth level there, but usually it's like they got to a point where it's a mature business. They're going to have some level of growth every year. But if you're a younger advisor, say, late 20s, early 30s, maybe, little early career transition there, and you're coming into the business, how might you advise them to build a business for the next 20, 30 years, given kind of what you've learned so far?
Yeah. So when I think about, especially our younger advisors coming in and how they need to position themselves to be competitive and to earn some of those maybe more tenured advisors' clients, right? I think that we have to think in a topic of our conversation, the virtual world, and being able to connect with clients on all levels. And so if you looked at, there was a recent study, I think it was in Think Advisor, it was published, and it did a graph on how many times clients had heard from their advisor. And it was shocking to me that there was probably about a third that had not heard from their advisor during this entire pandemic. And it's frightening to think that why would they go hide, right, during the pandemic and the markets and everything that's gone on. I think that when we look at our advisors that want to grow, this is a huge opportunity for them. Go out there, talk to your existing clients, but I'm going to guess that they have one of their friends that their advisor maybe isn't proactively reaching out to them and just say, hey, who else can I help? Is there somebody else I should be talking to that that might, want to hear some of these stats and maybe get some of these reassurances as we, go forward in the markets, because it's going to be a little while, right? I mean, everything's kind of shaken out, but there is a little bit of, what do we want to call it? The pandemic PTSD or something that you might have for clients who are just going to be like, oh my gosh, here we go. We're shutting down again. The markets are going to crash. Like, you don't want them to think that way. So it's really the financial advisor's job to reassure them, right? With all of the comfort of the planning that they've done, the diversification of their portfolio that they've built and done together, that, gives them that comfort that they need to go, you know what, we're going to be okay. And one of those clients are going to have a friend who said, you know what, my advisor doesn't talk to me. I don't hear from them. And so they need to take this as an opportunity to reach out, communicate not only with their existing clients, but then ask them who else I should be talking to. I think that's going to be a missed opportunity if you don't.
I think that's wonderful advice for you to think about what to do now and into the future, right? Get better at communicating. And as that kind of, I've seen those stats, right, where it's frightening how infrequently advisors touch their clients. And there's that whole, like, you have to touch a client 20 times a year for them to feel the love, if you will. Or, people are kind of coming to the realization that digital is it can be meaningful, right? Because it's how much time we all spend on our phones. We all are in it all the time, regardless of generation, frankly, right? Whatever the demographic is. A quick little email, a text, or a comment. And by the way, it doesn't have to be business related. You and I were talking before this about, I'm getting a new puppy, right? If you see a picture of my puppy on Facebook, it's okay. You click like it. And even if you're a business associate of me, it's going to make me feel good, right? You care, you've acknowledged me, you've seen me, right? So that type of stuff is really good. I think that's fantastic advice for just get more communicative and personally interactive online, and definitely help you build your business and grow it.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, Tammy, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really do appreciate you carving out the time here. I've learned a lot. What are the best ways for people to reach out to you? Because I'm sure people are going to have some questions for you, whether it's in your advisor population or other people that are in leadership roles across the industry. I know that people like to collaborate a little bit and kind of pick the grains of what's working for you, what's, all that type of stuff. What's the best way for somebody to reach out to you there at ProEquities?
Yeah. So certainly I'm on LinkedIn. It's Tammy, and my last name is Robbins with 2 B's, Robbins. And my direct line is 205-705-9803.
Well, wonderful. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you, Tammy.
Hey, thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. If you have subscribed to the show, you get a virtual fist bump. Bang! Thank you very much for subscribing to the podcast. Hey, make sure you let a friend know that you're enjoying the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. And as always, please do send in those suggestions. If you know somebody who should be on this show, or maybe it's you think should be on this show, please do reach out, podcast@truelytics.com, or hit us up on the socials, Truelytics everywhere, or I'm at Mike Langford everywhere. Love to hear from you. Also, monstrously huge thanks to Tammy Robbins for taking time out of her day to join us and share the things that she and the ProEquities team have learned with all of us. It's really, really generous of her to do so because, look, it's a competitive industry, but sometimes sharing the things we're learning, sharing the things that are working for us can help everyone in that kind of rising tide lifts all boats type of scenario. Okay, you know the drill. Make sure you stay safe. Please do wear your mask, keep your social distance, and be nice to each other, okay? We need it. We're all going to get through this together, okay? Hope you're doing well, and we will see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.